Buy land, AJ, because God ain't making any more of it.
Below is the city of Larnaca, a city nestled in the southeast corner of the island of Cyprus. The urban area of this settlement today numbers nearly 80,000 citizens, which makes it Cyprus's third largest city in relation to population. It is also home to the island's main transport and aviation gateway. In the distance is the Larnaca Salt Lake, which forms a barrier between the city and the airport. It is home to migrating and nesting flamingos and once provided employment to locals who collected salt from the lake. As you can see, there has been a lot of development, with the current municipal administration stating that high-rises will not blight the landscape like other areas of Cyprus. This is easier said than done, and money talks. Property and land issues have been on the agenda for decades on the island and are one of the main sticking points hindering the reunification of Cyprus's two main communities. This is the story of what happens when politics, greed, arrogance, ignorance, contradiction and corruption become intertwined, with research showing that the island is no different from anywhere else in the world. However, this is Cyprus, and it just becomes a little bit more awkward and complicated. Keyboard warriors and social media trolls have been active in disputing everything related to Cyprus. There is a lot of hatred published online, and it continues to grow. The purpose of this video is to highlight ongoing issues concerning the island, which is described as the unsinkable aircraft carrier, and it is again in the news due to the Iran crisis of 2026. Please ensure you watch part 1 of this series, which recounts stories of Turkish and Greek refugees displaced before and after 1974. The Road to Zodia is an important film and a precursor to this project. Disputes over land ownership in Cyprus continue, and this video will focus on the issues past and present. Did you know that part of the land at Larnaca Airport is owned by a Turkish Cypriot? This is not widely known and has been heavily debated. But who can you trust? As Tony Soprano said at the beginning to his son, "Buy land, AJ, because God ain't making any more of it." The return of or compensation for property lost in the conflict is a main stumbling block to the island's reunification and is a central issue if official talks restart. The Greek Cypriot Orthodox Church, as well as the FCAF administration, which is Turkish Cypriot and has its roots from Ottoman times, both own large swathes of land in Cyprus. However, how much both institutions control is open to debate. The whole property and land issue, including territorial adjustments, is a hot potato for all concerned, especially the politicians. It continues to rile the local population, as well as their diasporas in places as far away from the eastern Mediterranean. The politicians claim it will be all sorted out once a comprehensive peace deal is agreed between both the Turkish and Greek communities. However, this appears to be just lip service to appease their respective communities that a solution to the Cyprus problem is just around the corner. However, both communities have been here before, and cynicism to the whole process has become ingrained in the Cypriot mindset and adds to the whole dual amnesia mentality displayed on the island. As one political commentator once stated, 1974 is always yesterday in Cyprus. Turkish professor Kerim M. Munir reported in the Cyprus Mail in September 2025 that for Greek Cypriots, history begins with the Turkish invasion of 1974, with little appetite to confront the sequence of events from 1963 onwards, the breakdown of the Zurich-London Constitution, intercommunal violence, and the 1974 Athens junta coup. As well as Munir's observations, there was also a humanitarian emergency on the island in the late 1950s going into the 1960s, caused by the then Cyprus government policies and desire for enosis, union with Greece. Munir also states that for Turkish Cypriots, by contrast, 1974 is remembered as salvation, with scant acknowledgement of Greek Cypriot displacement and trauma and changing landscapes that increasingly reflect the economic, cultural, and political imprint of Turkey, sometimes at the expense of the island's shared Cypriot identity. This dual amnesia that is now entrenched serves neither truth nor reconciliation. It inflates victimhood, deflates empathy, and ensures that neither community can recognize itself in the mirror the other holds up. Research from a variety of sources has shown that the debate about land and ownership on Cyprus is one of fact, opinion, and contradiction, with online reporters sticking to their preferred narrative. As they say, the media will always pander to its readers' and viewers' prejudices. Cyprus is no different. However, things could have been a lot different before 1974. One Turkish Cypriot recalls the time before and after the Cyprus emergency of the 1950s. He lived and witnessed the changing face on the island during and after British colonial rule. 1955 saw the formation of EOKA, a Greek Cypriot paramilitary organization formed in 1954-1955 to end British rule in Cyprus and achieve enosis, union with Greece. The Turkish Cypriot community did not welcome EOKA's aspirations, but only became a target when they were employed as police officers by the British administration. Greek Cypriots had left the police service in droves after threats and killings became widespread in their own community by members of EOKA. Remember, Cyprus is a small island and everybody knows everybody else. Left-leaning Greek Cypriots were identified, with EOKA pressurizing them to join their armed struggle against the British. Greek Cypriot citizens were labelled traitors, anti-enosis sympathisers, and worse if they didn't participate. By 1956-57, some Greek Cypriot families had had enough and emigrated off the island to places such as the UK, Australia, and Canada. Initially, these Greek Cypriots started selling their land to Turkish Cypriots, but were soon threatened by EOKA to stop these transactions. However, by the late 1950s, more Greek Cypriots were leaving Cyprus with the help of the British at a rate of between 2,000 and 3,000 a month. Cyprus was nearing a depopulation crisis, with the British authorities on the island telling the Turkish Cypriots to encourage skilled workers from Turkey to emigrate to fill the void left by departing Greek Cypriots. Sir John Harding, the penultimate governor of Cyprus before independence in 1960, pointed out that he didn't think enosis, union with Greece, or taksim, partition, between both communities on the island was realistic. He believed that the only solution was for the Greek Cypriots to continue to leave the island, which would eventually mean that the Turkish Cypriots would slowly become the majority, and Britain would continue to administer their unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Mediterranean. The supposed Turkish mainland's skilled influx of workers onto the island never materialized. The British hoped that if the Cyprus emergency continued going into the 1960s, that the demographics on the island would change. It was well documented that within the Turkish Cypriot community on the island, that continued British administration on Cyprus was welcomed. If the ongoing battle for winning Cypriot hearts and minds continued, Cyprus may have become a different place. Turkish Cypriots that had fled abroad during these times were encouraged to return. However, British and Turkish Cypriots' aspirations were curtailed when the island gained independence in 1960. Turkey and Greece, along with the British, signed agreements handing control to the island's local population on a mostly 70-30 administrative ratio basis between Greek and Turkish Cypriots. The British warned on their departure that the island would fall into civil war again soon after. It was a bittersweet moment for the Turkish Cypriots, with the older generation even stating today that the best of times was had under the British and not under the Greek Cypriot-dominated Republic of Cyprus, or even the Turkish Cypriots' own administration in the north. As predicted, the fledgling Republic of Cyprus fell apart in 1963, when intercommunal fighting erupted. President Makarios, who had become the first president of the Republic, had filled his cabinet with ex-EOKA fighters and Enosis sympathizers. He had to play a balancing act between his own goals and that of his enemies within Greek Cypriot circles. Makarios was prepared to play the long game, by hook or by crook, to rid the island of its Turkish Cypriot population. He was determined to deliver the island to Greece and to be the one to do so. He was aware that others were watching, and not just in Cyprus. Peace talks between the Greek and Turkish communities restarted in 1968 when island-wide restrictions were lifted. Makarios was hoping to reverse the population trend started in the late 1950s and welcome back Greek Cypriot entrepreneurs from abroad. In the meantime, he stifled Turkish Cypriots economically and knew that if he pressed the right buttons, that in time the Turks would leave the island for a better life elsewhere. Enosis would be achieved without the need for more armed combat. By the early 1970s, Makarios was not flavour of the month within some camps, even inside his own administration. There was also the mainland Greek military junta, who had come to power in 1967. They wanted to score political points and eyed Cyprus's accession as part of Greece as the icing on the cake to appease their opponents. Makarios stepped cautiously with his enemies circling, and then 1974 happened. What happened on Cyprus in the summer of 1974 is well documented on this channel, and we always welcome new subscribers to learn more about the island's history and the stories linked to it. By August 1975, a population exchange had been agreed by the two communities in Vienna, Austria. This was achieved after concerns had arisen from incidents that involved the harassment, abduction and murder of Turkish Cypriot civilians in the south of the island. Turkish Cypriot leaders also claimed that their community were being held hostage by the Greeks in the south, and that something had to be done to secure their safety and security. 6 points regarding the transfer of populations, freedom of movement, human rights, security, UN access, and family reunification procedures were agreed upon. However, in time, some of the points just mentioned under the Third Vienna Population Exchange Agreement of 1975 came under the spotlight. Certain parts were not adhered to, with political spin and deflection tactics being used to cover up what was going on. UN personnel on the ground at the time reported that the 6 points agreed by the two community leaders in the mid-1970s were not necessarily being observed, and questions were being raised about who was actually in control. Harassment, eviction, and intimidation tactics were alleged to have been used by the Turkish authorities in the north of the island to remove the remaining Greek Cypriot population from the area controlled by the Turkish army. This contradicted points 2 and 3 of the Vienna 1975 agreements on human rights and freedom of movement. Ethnic cleansing wasn't even a term used at the time, yet evidence showed that this was occurring. Did anyone expect the whole process to be straightforward? As one Turkish Cypriot stated, there was, and still is, a lot of mistrust between the two communities. The separation of the two main ethnic groups was nothing new, and had actually been discussed about 10 years before the Cyprus crisis of 1974. An easily accessible online CIA report from 1964 outlined options regarding the Cypriot population following the intercommunal clashes on the island. Surprisingly or not, this is the CIA we're talking about after all. Plans and discussions were held within the organization regarding proposals related to the transfer of the Turkish Cypriot population off the island. Forget what the British had proposed earlier, namely letting the Greek Cypriots fight amongst themselves, then leave Cyprus and let in Turkish mainlanders to fill the void. The 1960 population of Cyprus was 573,566 persons, with a nearly 4-to-1 ratio in favour of the Greek community compared to the Turkish community. One of the ways the American intelligence community saw the solving of the Cyprus problem was to depopulate the Turks off the island. In time, this would no doubt have led to enosis, union with Greece, with Makarios delivering the island as he had envisaged. Due to the Turkish community's smaller number, proposals by the CIA included the movement of the island's Turkish community to Turkey with a financial incentive, as well as the possible relocation of the Turkish Cypriots to areas within Greece, such as Thrace or the Aegean Islands. The CIA report discussed the feasibility of its suggestions and the predicaments and implications that such a population transfer would involve. It mentioned the geographical, social, and economic impacts on Turkey and Greece, and on their respective mainland populations. The document briefly touched upon the sensitivities surrounding such a population transfer for the Turkish Cypriots. After all, Cyprus was their home, and they had cultural ties to it, and had lived under British protection. The declassified CIA report also highlighted alternatives, such as partitioning the island into different sectors and zones. Before, during and after the intercommunal fighting of the 1950s, which continued into the 1960s, the Turkish Cypriots had set up their own enclaves to safeguard themselves against Greek attack. They had moved out of mixed villages, with Greek Cypriots always claiming that such a move by the Turkish Cypriots was facilitated by the Turkish military and the TMT, which was a paramilitary organization composed of Turkish Cypriot fighters. Some mixed villages continued to house both communities, but there was considerable unease and mistrust. The Cyprus police was also split between ethnic lines, with the United Nations peacekeeping force seeking to monitor and prevent further clashes. Partition Alternative A was proposed at the start of 1964 and would have involved the Turkish Cypriots being moved into cantons. This plan would see the light of day again in the 1974 peace talks, after hostilities had ended on the island. The canton system was favoured by the Turkish Cypriots, but rejected by the Greek Cypriots, who felt that there was too much access to the sea, which meant Turkey could land reinforcements back onto the island if trouble flared up again. Partition Alternative B seems familiar to what we have now on the island, but with less land allocated to the Turkish Cypriots. There is a defined northern section which cuts through the capital, Nicosia. Partition Alternative C sees the Turks resettled on the west of the island, with Partition Alternative D showing two distinct zones, again in the west, around Paphos, as well as the east, around Larnaca. None of these plans, from A to D, were ever implemented. During the 1960s and into the early 1970s, Makarios knew he had time on his side and was prepared to play the long game to achieve his goals. During his time in office, he would make statements to appease his opponents to the detriment of the Turkish Cypriot population. He was meant to be president of the whole island, remember, an independent Cyprus. However, even after his return in November 1974, he clashed with his chief negotiator over peace negotiations with the Turks. In time, he realized that he would have to save face and agree in principle to the points agreed in the Austrian capital. Makarios even had the audacity to turn up at a Turkish Cypriot refugee camp within the British southern base area at the end of 1974. A proposed visit by the President, arranged at short notice, provoked an aggressive response from the refugees. The access road was blocked and the President returned to Nicosia. To summarize, even after the 1974 war and the ensuing population exchange agreements of 1975, most Cypriot citizens still believed they would return home and resume their lives as before. Security, safety, and survival, the three S's as I call them, became paramount for both communities. As you have seen and heard, the Greek Cypriots who remained in the north refused to live under Turkish administration, and in time they left, although a small pocket of a few thousand remained in the Kypros Peninsula in the northeast of the island. Restrictions were imposed upon them, contravening what had been discussed and agreed in Vienna in 1975. For Turkish Cypriots who had originally lived in the south, there was an urgent need to be reunited with their families in the north. The National Guard, composed solely of Greek Cypriots, the police, and elements of Ioka B, a Greek right-wing faction that had orchestrated the coup against Makarios, still roamed the mountainsides, foothills, and plains of southern Cyprus. These groups were equally determined to restrict the movement of the Turkish Cypriots who remained in areas south of the Green Line. War crimes were committed, which added to the dual amnesia displayed by both sides. In 2016, the former Foreign Minister of the Republic of Cyprus apologized to the Turkish Cypriot community for the massacres of Turkish Cypriots during the events of 1974 in settlements near Larnaca and Famagusta. Mrs. Arato Kazaku Makulis, a Greek Cypriot, faced criticism and threats for her social media posts and statements, but her conscience was clear. Former Turkish Cypriot leader Mustafa Akinci also referred to the suffering endured by Greek Cypriots during the summer of 1974 and afterwards. He acknowledged that they too had suffered and openly referenced the other side's trauma. Like Mrs. Markoulis, he was roundly condemned by sections within his own community. Although these politicians recognized the other side's physical and emotional afflictions and preached reconciliation between the two communities, psychologists and sociologists continue to argue that the Cypriot mindset prolongs the agonies and distress of what happened on the island before and after 1974. As mentioned earlier, the events of that summer are always yesterday in Cyprus. In social science terms, it has been referred to as the pain competition trap. In this dynamic, the mentality of both communities is that my pain is bigger than yours, and it is said to be a common but often unproductive way to seek validation for suffering. This aligns with people's perspective on pain and is said to be unavoidable, focusing only on the severity of one's own suffering compared to others, which can lead to isolation or a sense of superiority. Sharing or understanding others' suffering can change it from an isolating experience into a bridge to connect with other people. However, in Cyprus, the politicians and their media associates continue to stoke the fires and fuel the flames, which, after all, is in their interests and not that of their constituents. Any comprehensive settlement to the Cyprus problem involves land and property issues and has become a major stumbling block to a solution. Why are the figures allegedly so low? Land ownership data continues to be contested, with information produced and published by both sides showing inaccuracies and trumpeting their own narratives on the whole Cyprus problem. So, who to believe? However, did you know that before 1974, restrictions, especially on land ownership, were imposed on the Turkish Cypriot community? A Turkish Cypriot entrepreneur who had returned to the island from abroad wanted to build a hotel, but was initially told to submit plans for his development along the northern coast of Cyprus. He did so, but was then told by the authorities that he could not build there because it was in a military area. The businessman later found out that the land had been sold to a Greek Cypriot without any conditions. To appease him, he was informed that his hotel could go ahead if he had Greek Cypriot partners. However, he protested, pointing out that they never wanted to put any money into his hotel venture and only wanted to take the profits. Was this another example of Makarios and his regime stifling the economic development of Turkish Cypriots on the island? However, the Turkish Cypriot entrepreneur went to see Makarios and was finally granted permission to build his hotel, but only after he had kissed the president's hand. One way or another, he got his hotel built, but then war came to the island. A 2012 report by cultural anthropologist Rebecca Bryant on the displacement of Cypriots from the 1960s through the 1970s highlighted ongoing concerns for the two communities on the island. She reported that while Greek Cypriots, after 1974, have engaged in a politics of remembrance in which the present is perceived as temporary, Turkish Cypriots have engaged in a politics of forgetting in which the present is perceived as permanent. Certainly, official narratives on both sides of the island have encouraged these two different ways of approaching the past. This mentality is still evident on the island over a decade after Bryant published her research. Bryant's report also highlighted issues with the Vienna Agreement of 1975. She stated that initially 10,000 Turkish Cypriots in the south had resisted leaving their homes and properties. Some Turkish Cypriots said they had remained behind the Green Line in the south to protect their homes and personal possessions. Eventually, they moved north either by using UN convoys, paying couriers, usually Greek Cypriots, to transfer them to the other side, or by taking organized Turkish Airlines chartered flights out of RAF Akrotiri to Turkey, where they would then be transferred back to the northern part of the island. The transfer of populations, both Greek and Turkish, during this period saw personal possessions loaded onto vehicles with the intention that the other side would not benefit from them. As mentioned earlier, it was thought that the displacement of both communities would be temporary and that, in time, people would return home. Documentation from the National Archives in London from 1975 stressed that some Turkish Cypriot properties in Paphos were deliberately damaged by their departing owners, knowing that they would be handed over to displaced Greek Cypriot refugees fleeing or resettled from the north. On the other hand, during the intercommunal clashes of the 1960s, Turkish Cypriots had reported that their properties, especially in mixed villages, had been deliberately plundered, damaged, or reduced to rubble by Greek Cypriots to impede their return. Although peace talks between Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot negotiators Ralph Denktash and Glavkos Klarides restarted in 1968, 23,000 Turkish Cypriots were still unable to return to their homes from their so-called exile in self-appointed enclaves in Cyprus. The number of displaced Greek Cypriots affected by the intercommunal troubles of the 1960s has never been emphasized or made readily available. This changed after the events of 1974 onwards. We spoke to some Turkish Cypriots about their relocation to the north and what they endured. One man recalled being held as a prisoner of war in a school in Larnaca, along with other Turkish Cypriot men. He was eventually released as part of a prisoner exchange, and he made his way north alone, where his family had been resettled near Kyrenia. He said it took him a couple of days, and he slept with others in abandoned properties along the way, and ate what he could. He was eventually reunited with his family. The physical and mental burden he endured is still evident today. He still thinks of Larnaca as his home. Another man who had also been a prisoner of war at the same school in Larnaca reported that he was dropped off on the main road in Karavas near Kyrenia and told that his family had been billeted in a property in one of the side streets. He recalled it was the dead of night and that he anxiously walked along the road to try to find his family members. The young man eventually found them in a property opposite the church in the center of the town. There was a mixture of apprehension, worry, and unease about the whole exercise. Others no doubt shared similar experiences. So, how were property and land distributed in the north? Accounts vary. Rebecca Bryant's 2012 report stated that Greek Cypriot property was distributed by lot in the early period, though many people found houses they liked and squatted in them. Each family that settled in rural areas was given a house and agricultural land, while each family that settled in towns and cities was given a house and a shop or office. Although Ralph Denktash, the Turkish Cypriot leader, is said to have controlled the narrative for his community, he did clash with Turkish government and army officials on occasion about the handling of the Cyprus problem post-1974. It is alleged that Denktash and his ally, the Turkish Cypriot mayor of Famagusta, Mr. Bora Atun, had at the time investigated how Greek Cypriots were managing their refugees in the south. They tried to implement the same policy in the so-called Turkish Federated State of Cyprus, which was under the control of Turkey. The Turkish Cypriot politicians identified that the Republic of Cyprus's government contributed to rents, the distribution of land and property, and welfare. On seeing this, it is said that Denktash recommended that rents be paid for Greek Cypriot properties, but he was shut down. The Turkish authorities strongly argued that they had died for this land and would take and do what they wanted. Land was offered to Turkish soldiers who had fought on Cyprus, and they were encouraged to settle. TMT fighters were also offered land and property, and Turkish Cypriot expats were encouraged to return to the island. Rebecca Bryant stated that only in 1977 was a point system established to assign properties based on what Turkish Cypriots had left behind in the south. The system, however, was reportedly rife with nepotism, favoritism, and various forms of discrimination, including political discrimination. A committee was set up to distribute land and property in villages and towns, with few questions being asked. Turkish mainland settlers also began arriving on the island soon after the events of 1974. They had initially been encouraged by the British and Turkish Cypriots to fill the void left by departing Greek Cypriots during the intercommunal troubles of the 1950s and 1960s. This Turkish mainland influx never materialized, but by the mid to late 1970s, a steady stream was arriving from Asia Minor. These new arrivals from Turkey were not necessarily skilled enough to take over the jobs and businesses left by departing Greek Cypriots in the north. There is still fierce criticism and anger about what has happened, especially within the Republic of Cyprus, and about the claim that this move was intended to change the population balance in the north and undermine any future solution. On occasion, people tried to abuse the land and point system. A Turkish Cypriot was interviewed about how much land he had lost in the south. However, When officials began to add up the total square meters based on the answers they had been given, their eyes were said to have popped out of their heads, because the total came to 1.5 times the total square meters of Cyprus as a whole. This level of corruption still exists on the island today and affects both sides of the divide. Deeds, certificates and compensation were then distributed to Turkish Cypriots after 1977 to alleviate the difficulties caused by the points system. Denktash and his allies had been adamant that had the rental structure he had advocated been set up after 1974, the abuse of the system would have been curbed and kept under control. He was an accomplished lawyer, but no one was listening. People were getting rich, with large swathes of land being developed and unscrupulous practices becoming the norm, which led to some to rename the Turkish North as Mafiaville. More political deadlock followed in negotiations between the Turkish and Greek Cypriots. In time, the Green Island of Cyprus, as it is affectionately known, began to fall under the control of bulldozers, cement mixers, asphalt layers, irresponsible planners, unscrupulous officials and business people who were safe in the knowledge that the Cyprus problem wouldn't be sorted out anytime soon. The property and land agenda applicable to Cyprus after 1974 increased tenfold when crossings opened in 2003, allowing displaced Greek Cypriots to finally visit their homes in the Turkish sector of the island. Turkish Cypriots travelled south to see what had happened to their former homes and lands. One Turkish Cypriot reported,
"We were thinking, we came here and settled in Greek Cypriots' houses, and we've looked after them. That is, the condition of the houses has gotten better, not worse. My whole family and I were expecting that Greek Cypriots would have looked after our houses and that they would be standing, that there would be people living in them. But when we crossed to see our house, we experienced a huge disappointment when we found that it had fallen down. It was like a cold shower, and after that, I didn't even want to go to my village again."
Similar stories were reported among Turkish and Greek Cypriots, with some unwilling to return to see ancestral homes once more out of principle. A Turkish Cypriot businessman, originally from Limassol and now residing in the north, featured in a 2012 Dutch TV documentary about the political and property issue in Cyprus.
So how did you then end up here?
As soon as the Turkish army landed from the north, the Greeks, they started against their own community, the Turks, and they gathered us together. And after spending 100 days in the prison, nobody wanted to stay anymore with the Greeks. If they hadn't captured us, nobody would want to come leave their property and come to the north.
So the Turkish Cypriots ended up here, and the Greek Cypriots ended up on the other side. And could you then choose where you were going to stay?
Yes.
Yeah, you could. Okay.
Of course.
People like me, we had a committee and they were choosing, for example, if somebody had a restaurant, we are letting him have a restaurant. If somebody had a market, we are letting him have a... And whatever business you had in the south, the committee was deciding to give them the same sort of business. And that's why
Same sort of business,
yes.
and you were fine with it?
We are safe.
You're safe.
At least when we walk, we know that we are not going to be shot, we are not going to be stopped, we are not going to be frightened by anybody. We are not just free, but at the same time we are safe.
You didn't have any future
Yes.
in the south. No.
I understand, but I would still feel I'm living in somebody else's house.
think
It's
that
like a
because-
theft, isn't it?
No, I know, but as they are living in mine, why should I think that way? Because I got my house there, I got my business there, and somebody else is using it. As I can't go there and they are using it, why not me using their property? And if it was left as a ruin, was it going to be better? Tell me.
The whole experience of crossing over to the other side meant that various propaganda myths soon evaporated, although for some, the entire episode of seeing childhood homes and lands transformed became bittersweet. There was a lot of head-scratching, chin-rubbing and finger-pointing as both Turkish and Greek Cypriots tried to place and locate their memories in areas they hadn't seen in nearly 30 years.
Από η ώρα 6 το πρωί, όση ώρα δυο το δίλεις να περάσω.
Και άμα επίες,
Όταν επία, έκλαια για μια εβδομάδα που για τα χαλάσματα και τα πράγματα. Ήμουν καλύτερα να μην πάω για να μείνουν στη μνήμη μου εκείνα που έξερα.
θέλεις να μου πεις το όνομα σου?
Γιάννης Καραμούτης. Πειράζει.
The opening of the crossings was initiated to support the 2004 Annan peace plan, which was intended to offer a comprehensive solution for the island after decades of deadlock. The referendum was overwhelmingly rejected by the Greek Cypriot community, leaving the Turkish Cypriots in political limbo. Two Greek Cypriots were interviewed about the ongoing stalemate between the two sides.
Απίστευτη πίκρα, γιατί αφήσαμε να περάσουν 50 χρόνια χωρίς να εκμεταλλευτούμε τις ευκαιρίες που κατά καιρούς μας δόθηκαν. Θα μπορούσαμε τώρα να το είχαμε λυμμένο το Κυπριακό και να ήμασταν πολύ καλύτερα. Και θυμώνω πάρα πολύ γιατί στήθηκαν καριέρες πάνω στο Κυπριακό, εκμεταλλευόμενοι το Κυπριακό, και άφησαν τον κόσμο τόσα χρόνια στο έλεος, πραγματικά στο έλεος του Θεού.
Νομίζετε όμως ότι θα μπορούσαμε να το είχαμε λύσει τόσα χρόνια?
Είχαμε αρκετές ευκαιρίες και καλές ευκαιρίες. Και εδώ είναι ένα δεύτερο μεγάλο λάθος που έχουν κάνει οι κυβερνήσεις κατά καιρούς, γιατί δεν χτίσανε την ιδέα της επανένωσης ανάμεσα στους νέους και τον κόσμο. Τουναντίον αυτό το δεν ξεχνώ και τα χώματά μας και τα σύνορά μας είναι η Κερίνια, που ήταν λάθος ευθύς εξ αρχής, γιατί ουδέποτε θα υπάρξει μία λύση που να έχουμε σύνορα στην Κερίνια. Έπρεπε λοιπόν να καλλιεργηθεί το αίσθημα της επανένωσης και της συμβίωσης.
Το σπίτι μου ήταν ακριβώς 3 λεπτά από το αεροδρόμιο Λευκωσίας, ήμουν στο σπίτι μου. Σήμερα δεν μπορώ να πάω. Όταν πήγα την τελευταία φορά πριν 2 μήνες, μου απαγόρευσε εκείνος που κάθεται στο σπίτι να βγάλω φωτογραφία και μου είπε «Για Σάκρε». Λέω του «Γιατί για Σάκρε, το σπίτι δικό μου». Να σου τα πω που μου το είπε «Έχελε πολλά». Κατάλαβες που φτάσαμε.
Turkish Cypriots who had been excluded from the island's prosperity from 1964 until 1974 pointed out that they have no desire to become refugees again, and that the promises made after the Annan plan, which they supported, never materialized. So why should they move again? As much as foreign property investors and buyers are discouraged from purchasing Greek Cypriot land and homes in the north, issues related to Turkish Cypriot property and homes in the area under the recognized Republic of Cyprus's jurisdiction have also come to light, and there is an air of hypocrisy about the whole land and property saga on the island. The government of the Republic of Cyprus established the Guardian of Turkish Cypriot Properties in 1991 to oversee the management of Turkish Cypriot lands and buildings. The media reported that certain government, municipal and business officials from across the south had openly abused the system established in 1991 to prevent the abuse and corruption of Turkish Cypriot property. The same nepotism, favoritism, and various forms of discrimination, including for political reasons discussed in the north earlier, had also prevailed south of the Green Line. Information on this is readily available online, especially in areas in the Paphos district of the island. Further stories have emerged in recent years about events south of the buffer zone in the iconic village of Panolefkara between Larnaca and Limassol. The municipality has recently encouraged the renovation of former Turkish Cypriot homes in the once mixed village, which is known worldwide for its lace making. Turkish Cypriots were evacuated from the area in 1964 during the intercommunal clashes, then resettled nearby and finally transferred to areas in northern Cyprus after 1974. However, there has been a war of words over funding between the local council and government officials, with each side pointing fingers and blaming the other for inaction on payments and provisions. It is alleged that funds ring-fenced for the restoration of Turkish Cypriot homes were channeled elsewhere. Panolefkara, one of Cyprus's main tourist attractions, can ill afford for its Turkish Cypriot properties, said to number over 100 and excluding farmland, to become any more dilapidated, as it is bad for business. Tourists have walked along the village's intricate roads and alleyways and have begun to question why these properties are empty and where their owners have gone. This has prompted some uncomfortable questions, with one Greek Cypriot village resident stating that he never knew Turkish Cypriots had once lived in the settlement.
What do you call 1,000 lawyers chained together at the bottom of the ocean? A good start? Very amusing.
Media reports have also emerged over the years about land being sold across the divide, with former owners seeking quick sales amid the political deadlock in the Cyprus problem negotiations. However, officials from both sides have tried to discourage their communities from selling, with the Greek Cypriot side particularly fearing that it could further entrench the status quo. Official, up-to-date figures on land ownership have never been made public, leaving frustrated and angry Cypriot citizens in the dark about land and property ownership. If such figures were ever published, it could end political careers on the island, given the sensitivity attached to land and property in Cyprus. Trying to get answers has been met with a wall of silence, with political and legal remedies, such as the North's Immovable Property Commission, being used to address land and property issues in the Turkish-occupied area of Cyprus. The IPC was formed in 2005 and is supported by the European Court of Human Rights. It processes claims related to compensation, restitution, and exchange, and, due to the heavy backlog of applications, lawyers are also involved in the process. In May 2026, the media had claimed that the Aspelia Hotel, mentioned earlier in this video, had been sold by its owners, the Greek Orthodox Church of Cyprus. However, the church denies this, although rumours of other hotels and apartments in Varosha being sold off have circulated in recent years, especially when a small section of Varosha was made accessible in 2020. What of the Turkish Cypriot who claimed ownership of the land at Larnaca airport? Rumours and counter-rumours have since appeared online, with neither side claiming victory. Some have stated that the would-be owner had been paid off, whilst others dismissed the person's legal rights. A letter appeared in an edition of the Cyprus Mail in February 2026 from a concerned Greek Cypriot who claimed Cyprus was being bought piece by piece. The conclusion of the letter read, However, in recent years, Cyprus and Israel have become partners in several areas, from economic to energy cooperation. So why does the writer of the letter consider it an issue now? It is an open secret that land and property in the north have also been taken up by Israelis. Other stories have recently appeared, including one in May 2026, when an entire abandoned village near Limassol was sold and developed by an Israeli developer. The Israeli businessman who had developed the site in the village of Trozina has become perplexed by the scrutiny of his venture. In the past couple of years, court cases and arrests against rogue property developers in the north have also resulted in prison sentences and fines imposed by the authorities in the Republic of Cyprus. In 2023, British High Commissioner for Cyprus, Mr. Irfan Siddiq, stated that Turkey's second operation in Cyprus in August 1974 was a land grab. His interpretation of events led to him being heckled by a mostly British expatriate community at a meeting in the north of the island. The land grab quote was a bit rich coming from a British diplomat, given the history of the British Empire and what it entailed. The purpose of this video was to highlight the current situation on the island regarding land and property and what had happened before. Bad things happened in Cyprus before and after 1974. There was a refugee crisis caused by the intercommunal troubles of the 1950s through to the 1960s, which then mushroomed into the 1970s. No side can have carte blanche about the events that happened on the island. Cypriots, Turkish or Greek, who have their own cemented viewpoints. Some of the questions that need to be asked are, what happens from here? Is compensation for land and property lost the only way forward now? What happens if another referendum is rejected by either side? What happens if third-party countries become involved in the Cyprus problem and go to war over it? It is down to the politicians, but there is increasing cynicism among the electorate, who are more than ever clued in as to how politics work, thanks to social media. Where are the leaders? Are they just the mouthpieces of corporations and businesses these days, acting in their own self-interest and that of their so-called elitist friends? Based on what you've seen and heard, what is the bigger picture and future for Cyprus? Paradise may truly be lost for good.